So, what does actually limit muscle hypertrophy? This question of what actually hampers or limits hypertrophy is a very astute question to ask, right? If we actually know what causes hypertrophy to slow down or impedes its progress, we can potentially unlock it and get bigger hypertrophy gains. So in this video, I thought I would actually answer the question of what actually hampers muscle gains, aka hypertrophy. Now, to note, there's a lot of different things that can actually hamper hypertrophy. So I'll just focus on what are the biggest ones and why. But before I tell you what actually limits hypertrophy within the muscle fiber, I thought I would tell you what actually does not limit hypertrophy, and it is something that I see a lot out there in Instagram and YouTube about experts telling you that the reason you're not getting bigger is that you're not eating enough. Of course, this is complete bullshit. In science, every time that we try to answer this question of is it lack of food that actually hampers hypertrophy, and we set up groups who are overeating compared to normal eating, calorie balanced diets and stuff like that, people who overeat always end up just getting fatter. So overeating does not help you gain muscle, and lack of food is not the reason why you're not getting bigger. It's not actually a rate limiting step of hypertrophy. To know what actually hampers hypertrophy, we actually need to go inside the muscle fiber and look of what series of events actually bring down the maximum capacity for hypertrophy. In computer science, we have a term called bottleneck, and the bottleneck inside of a computer, in terms of its hardware, is the slowest hardware that hampers and brings down the performance of the whole computer. So, for example, if your processor is slower than your RAM, that will be your bottleneck. That actually hampers and slows down the whole system, because your RAM can be very fast and your GPU can be very powerful. But if your CPU is not up to the task of keeping up with your RAM and your GPU, then your computer will be as fast as your processor. This bottleneck analogy serves us well because inside the muscle fiber, we actually get rate-limiting steps, rate-limiting enzymes and structures and genes transcriptions that bring down the maximum capacity for hypertrophy. So you can think of certain protein structures and enzymes that are slower than the rest of the components that actually bring about hypertrophy as the bottlenecks for hypertrophy in the overall sense. There are 6 different components of the hypertrophy program that can actually bring down the hypertrophy response. First up, we have ribosome biogenesis. So when you work out, you actually activate the mTOR pathway, and its downstream target, the P70X6K kinase, which brings about ribosome biogenesis. The ribosome biogenesis is basically the upregulation of the number of ribosomes that you have inside of your muscle fiber, and that the activation of that kinase and how much it actually gets upregulated actually correlates with hypertrophy gains in the long run. Secondly, we have the androgen receptor. The androgen receptor is basically what it sounds. It's a receptor in your muscle fiber membrane that actually detects the level of androgens. Now, this receptor actually goes down as you train, but in the individuals in which the androgen content does not go down, they get a bigger hypertrophy response than the ones that do actually downregulate the androgen receptor. Thirdly, we have mitochondria content. Mitochondria are actually the power plant, the unit of energy production inside a muscle fiber. And what we see is that high responders, extreme responders in the hypertrophy sense, actually possess more mitochondrial volume than the low responders. Fourthly, we have microRNA. MicroRNA are a specific type of RNA that actually impedes translation of existing RNA. MicroRNA impedes translation by attaching themselves to existing RNA and blocking the capacity of the ribosomes actually read the RNA inside the muscle fiber. And for the cool kids out there, extreme responders of hypertrophy actually keep their microRNA 133 up as the training program proceeds, and that actually correlates with hypertrophy gains. Fifth on the list is muscle stem cells. Muscle stem cells are specialized cells or specialized stem cells that reside between the sarcolemma and the base lamina of the muscle fiber, and they actually have the responsibility to add or to replace nuclei within the muscle fiber. And we see that the expansion of the muscle stem cell niche actually correlates with hypertrophy. So extreme responders of hypertrophy actually augment their stem cell niche more than low responders. And lastly, but not least, because this might be the most important thing, more on that later, is myonuclear addition. Myonuclear addition is the concept of actually adding myonuclei to existing muscle fibers. And we actually see that the more myonuclei, the more nuclei you have within a muscle fiber, the more potential for hypertrophy one has. So now you know what actually limits hypertrophy. It's the ribosome biogenesis, the androgen receptor, the mitochondrial content or lack of, the microRNA or potentially lowering the microRNA, the stem cell niche, and lastly the myonuclear addition. So those are the reasons why you might not be getting the muscle gains that you want. And remember that eating more will not get you there, but I will try to come up with a series of videos that can actually help you to mitigate these bottlenecks the most.